It wasn't the desert heat that made Colonel Massoud sweat. It was the bottle. Cold, sweating, sparkling water. The kind served during high-level meetings, always placed just right next to each seat. Nothing fancy, but today that simple bottle was laced with something far more dangerous than heat: betrayal. President Ibrahim Traoré sat calmly under the thatched roof of a remote military outpost near the northern border. Around him, a dozen senior officers, trusted men, or so it seemed, leaned in over maps and whispered strategies. But one bottle was meant to kill him. The man who brought it, Lieutenant Dabo, smiled too easily. His eyes didn't match his words. He'd waited weeks for this moment, believing no one would suspect a loyal face. What he didn't know was this: Traoré already knew, and he wasn't the one being hunted today. The meeting was supposed to be routine: logistics, strategy, movement of troops in the eastern corridor where insurgent activity had spiked. On the surface, nothing unusual, but every breath in that room felt too rehearsed, too clean. President Ibrahim Traoré's eyes scanned the room slowly. His face gave away nothing, but his mind was busy calculating. He noted how Lieutenant Dabo, seated across from him, avoided direct eye contact. How he placed the bottle slightly forward, just within the president's reach. How he chuckled at the right jokes, nodded at the right plans, like a man who had already written the end of the story. But Traoré wasn't a man who lived by someone else's script. The air in the outpost buzzed with the sound of ceiling fans and distant radio chatter. Dust floated through sunbeams that cut across the room. The water bottle, chilled, clear, innocent-looking, sat untouched. "Before we proceed," Traoré said, picking up a red marker and circling a point on the map, "let's revisit our supply line through Tenkodogo." He was stalling, watching, letting the clock tick. Dabo shifted slightly, just enough to signal anxiety to anyone paying attention. What Dabo didn't know was that the bottle had already been tested, its contents replaced. The original, laced with poison, sat sealed in a cooler miles away, guarded by two plainclothes officers. The real trap was already set, and Dabo had already walked into it. Lieutenant Malik Dabo had waited months for this moment. It wasn't just about the money, though the foreign briefcase under his bed, packed with tightly bound bills, certainly helped him sleep at night. No, this was about making history, about doing what others only whispered in dark corners. He would be the man who took down Ibrahim Traoré, the so-called soldier president, the one who defied foreign interests, who dared to speak of sovereignty and pride like they were more than slogans. Today, that fantasy would become real. Dabo had studied Traoré for weeks, his habits, his schedule, even his favorite water brand. It was always the same: chilled, sparkling water from a northern spring, served during important meetings. It took connections and a little grease to get into the chain that handled the president's beverages. But Dabo had done it. A technician at the depot was paid off. A batch of identical bottles was altered. Only one of them carried the slow, tasteless toxin. He had watched the bottle being packed in ice. He had driven it here himself, and now there it sat, inches from Traoré's hand. The others were focused on maps, on movement, on terrain. Dabo pretended to be one of them, leaning in, marking positions with a pen, occasionally raising a finger to his chin like he was deep in thought. He nodded when others nodded, laughed politely, responded when spoken to. But his heart pounded, each second stretched like rope. Why wasn't he drinking it? Traoré was calm, too calm. He hadn't touched the bottle. He hadn't even glanced at it. And then he spoke. That damn voice, always steady, always in command. "Let's revisit Tenkodogo." Dabo's stomach tightened. That wasn't part of the plan. That wasn't where the supply line was supposed to be discussed today. Was it a delay tactic? A coincidence? Number Traoré wasn't a man who did things by accident. Sweat gathered at the base of Dabo's neck. His hands stayed perfectly still on the table, but his thoughts raced. Did someone talk? Did the technician crack? No, he was sure. He was sure. He had burned the notes, used gloves, washed the tools. He had rehearsed every step. The bottle was supposed to be opened casually, shared even. Traoré sometimes handed his bottle to an aide, sometimes poured it into a glass. The toxin was slow, designed to mimic dehydration at first. Symptoms that wouldn't show until hours later. Long enough for Dabo to be on a convoy heading west. Long enough to vanish. So why hadn't the bottle been touched? He glanced around. A soldier standing by the wall near the entrance seemed different. Not out of place exactly, but sharper, less casual, his posture too alert. And another one, leaning by the map board, wasn't one Dabo recognized. His mouth went dry. They knew. He couldn't run. Not now. That would be suicide. If they knew, they wouldn't act here. Not in front of everyone. That meant he still had a chance. Maybe they were watching. Maybe they suspected, but had no proof. Dabo forced himself to speak. We could flank the corridor from the southeast, avoid the main trail. Less exposure, he said, pointing at the map. Traoré turned to him. His eyes locked on Dabo's for just a second too long, then a nod. Good thinking, Lieutenant. But the nod didn't feel like approval. It felt like the final page of a closed book. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. No one rushed. Papers were gathered, bottles untouched. Men stood, saluted, and walked out in ones and twos. Traoré was the last to leave. Dabo remained seated, pretending to jot down notes. The room emptied. The guard near the door moved slightly, and then a hand touched his shoulder. President wants a word, the guard said. Not a question, a statement. Dabo turned, trying to smile. Of course. He was led out not through the front, but down a back hallway he didn't know existed. It was quiet, too quiet. His footsteps echoed. In a small room, cold and bare, Traoré stood with two other men. The bottle, his bottle, sat on the table between them. Do you recognize this? Traoré asked. Dabo's mouth opened, closed. Traoré didn't wait for an answer. He nodded to the man beside him, who opened a small cooler and pulled out a second identical bottle. This one sealed in evidence tape. This, Traoré said, was intercepted before it reached the outpost. Then he leaned forward. And this, he continued, pointing at the bottle from the meeting, was the replacement. Silence. You've been sloppy, Lieutenant, and now you're going to tell us who else is involved, because this isn't just about betrayal, it's about who sent you. Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath the same mango tree where the meeting had taken place just hours earlier. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the compound. The dust in the air glowed gold. He inhaled deeply, the dry scent of wind, sweat, and strategy. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to kill him, but it was the first time one of the traitors had looked him in the eye and smiled while doing it. The bottle still sat on the table, untouched. He had known about the plot for days. The intel had come through a junior logistics officer, a boy barely 20 who'd overheard whispers in a supply truck, then reported it, terrified. Traoré hadn't hesitated. He ordered silence, planted false movements, rerouted the real meeting, and let the traitor dig his own grave. Now Dabo was in a windowless room, 3 soldiers posted at the door. Not a prison, not yet, but close. Traoré didn't go to him immediately. Instead, he stood with Commander Bakari, the head of internal security. You see his face? Traoré asked. Bakari nodded. He tried to hide it, but he knew. The moment no one touched the water, he panicked. Good. Traoré's voice was steady. Fear is useful. Fear makes people talk. He walked slowly toward the compound. His boots pressed soft patterns into the sand. He wasn't in a rush. The real weapon wasn't the gun at his hip. It was the truth he already held and the pressure he was about to apply. When he entered the room, Dabo was seated, hands bound loosely in front of him. He looked up, defiant but cracking. A man who'd built a house of confidence on a crumbling lie. You've been paid, Traoré said. That much is clear. He sat down opposite Dabo, resting his hands on the table between them. Calm, patient. Now tell me, who paid you? Dabo said nothing, but the silence wasn't strong. It was scared. Traoré leaned in. You think this ends with your silence? You think we haven't traced the money? That we don't know where your wife went last week? Or where the man who trained you in Accra lives now? A flicker of panic. There it was. You have one chance, Malik, not to save yourself. That part's over. But maybe to protect what's left. And slowly, Dabo began to talk. Traoré didn't blink. The mango leaves rustled in the wind outside. Quiet applause for a battle won without a bullet. The confession came in broken pieces. Names, roots, frequencies. A network of whispers that stretched far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Dabo spoke like a man already dead, because in his mind, he was. And Traoré listened, not just to the words, but to the silence between them. Silence that spoke of betrayal at levels he had long suspected. When Dabo finally stopped, his head hung low, throat dry. The room was quiet. Traoré stood. He walked to the small window, the only crack of light in the room, and looked out across the dusty horizon. There were no tears, no anger, just the slow, heavy breath of a man carrying a nation on his back. He turned. You weren't the first, he said quietly. You won't be the last. Dabo didn't answer. He couldn't. Outside, the compound buzzed with life again. Soldiers moved with purpose. A Black Hawk passed overhead, but inside, time was still. Bakari entered, a folded note in his hand. He passed it to the president. It's confirmed, he said. The signal came from inside Lomé. Traoré nodded. He expected as much. He looked at Dabo one last time. Not with hate, but something colder. Dismissal. Take him, he said. 2 guards stepped in. As they dragged Dabo out, Traoré remained still. Then with precise steps, he made his way to the central courtyard. Cameras were already waiting. A statement had been requested by the press, and he was ready to deliver one. He stood before the nation, not with speeches, but with clarity. The kind of clarity that cuts through noise like a blade. There are those who believe Burkina Faso is for sale, he began, voice steady, eyes burning. They think they can buy our loyalty, poison our leaders, and divide our people. A pause, no teleprompter, no notes. To them, I say this, we see you. We are not blind. We are not afraid. The crowd was silent, watching, breathing with him. You send us spies, we send you a message. You offer us chains, we answer with fire. He looked directly into the lens, a direct shot to every enemy watching from afar. This land is not yours. This future is not yours to shape. And every man who thinks he can break us from within will find we do not bend. We do not bow, we rise. The feed ended, and somewhere, across an ocean, someone turned off a screen. Lips pressed, eyes narrowing. The game wasn't over, but Traoré had just made his move. In every battle, not all enemies stand across the field. Some sit at the same table. Ibrahim Traoré's story is more than a tale of survival. It's a lesson in leadership, vigilance, and the cost of standing for something greater than oneself. He knew the fight for a sovereign nation wouldn't come only from outside invasions, but from the quiet knives hidden in familiar hands. Yet instead of reacting with fear or fury, he chose patience, strategy, and truth. This story reminds us, power isn't just about force, it's about clarity, composure, and the courage to confront shadows without blinking. In a world where loyalty is often bought and silence is deadly, the true strength of a leader lies not in how loudly he speaks, but in how wisely he listens. And sometimes the most powerful message is not shouted, it is shown